Hey guys, I'm Ted, here to give you another lecture, and for this lecture we're going to discuss we're going to discuss the Transcontinental Railway. We're going to complete our lecture on that, but before we do that, I'd like to do a quick recap on what we discussed in our last lecture. So in our last lecture, we finally got to the completion of the first Transcontinental Railway back in May of 1869, on May 10th to be exact, of 1869. With President Ulysses S. Grant in attendance, Leland Stanford drove home the Golden Spike, completing the first Transcontinental Railway. We discussed how this railway was a very difficult endeavor for the nation. A lot of engineering innovations had to be created, had to be introduced for the Transcontinental Railway to be completed. But the railway also benefited the nation by allowing the then infant steel industry in Birmingham to emerge, and by spurring the growth and development of the forestry industry in Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. We also discussed how innovations had to be continually put into place for safety purposes. We discussed the air brake, invented by George Westinghouse, how that allowed trains to be larger, longer, and also dramatically improved the safety of the rail cars. And we also discussed the early attempts at dealing with the problem of snow and snowfall on the Great Plains and in the mountains. And it is there that we'll pick back up with the solution, because shovels simply weren't going to cut it on the Nebraska plains. So we'll pick right back up from where we left off, discussing how they dealt with that increased snowfall. Now, shovels were quickly replaced by what are known as bucker plows. Now, bucker plows were immense blades that were pushed up against the snowbank to dislodge the snow. It often took more than one attempt to clear away the snow. In 1884, another railway invention was made, and that was the rotary snow plow. Now, the rotary snow plow looked like an airplane propeller in a box frame, and it was placed in front of the locomotive. Now, the blades were self-powered, and the blades cut through the snow, powdering it and sending it safely to the sides. Now, this was a great improvement because really the bucker plow simply involved bashing the snow out of the way. Now, and rotary plows, rotary snow plows, are still in use, most prominently in the Alaskan railways, but also in the Western Mountain Railways of Western Canada, and also into the northern Western Plains and northern Western Mountains of the United States. Now, the railways were also the first in the Republic to decide to run no matter what the season was. Prior to this, everything was done by season. Much like how before the electric light bulb, everything was done by daylight hours. After their completion, the railways decided to run no matter what, and mainly that was a cost decision. It was a financial decision. The cost of building the railways were so great that from a business point of view, it simply made no sense. It made no sense to leave them idle for months on end. Another railroad improvement was the manufacturing, or the decision to manufacture steel carriages. Prior to 1904, the rail cars and rail carriages had been largely made of wood, and wooden carriages were fire hazards. They were really major fire hazards. Locomotives itself always had a great burning fire, and embers would occasionally fly from their fires. Now, crashes were also quite common in the early days of rail travel. Wooden carriages were literally overstuffed, and literally this is what the what early train travel was. There were wooden carriages that were literally overstuffed with armchairs, with heavy and elaborate Victorian decoration. And in the winter months, during winter travel, there was normally an open coal brazier that was used for heating purposes that was just placed in the middle of all these seats. And of course, there were kerosene lamps. It was literally just a big fire waiting to happen. And regularly, the trains would crash, the wooden carriages would splinter, and the debris from the collision would catch a fire, and those who survived the first impact of the crash would then die in a train fire. Now, between 1870 and 1950, the luxurious way to travel was by train, and George Pullman specialized in making luxurious trains. The Pullman trains were very popular, and for the most of the century, they had employed African Americans to serve as the chefs, the porters, and they were noted for having excellent sleeping quarters. They really built a reputation on hospitality and quality food and service. Now, the trains were manufactured in Pullman's model town of Pullman, Illinois. And it was also possible to buy your own rail car if you were a millionaire or simply get rich enough. Personal rail cars were the status symbols. It was much like owning a luxury yacht or a personal jet. If you wanted to travel, and travel in style, you would simply retrieve your personal rail car that was typically housed at the local rail yard, and you simply rented a locomotive to pull it. Now, the completion of the first Transcontinental Railway led to a hunting craze. And this was really characterized by a group of friends, wealthy men, simply going out in their own sleeping trains, and hunting buffalo on the Great Plains. But it wasn't just there. It wasn't just these wealthy men. The average rail passenger also helped to spur the domestic tour industry of many of these middle states, these states in between the destinations. Railways played a great role in developing this domestic tourism industry. One of the later transcontinental railways to be completed was the Santa Fe Railway. Now, this line ran through New Mexico and Arizona, and they developed the Grand Canyon as a major tourism destination in the late 19th century, and some people may go on to even say in the early 21st century. Arizona may be regarded as the ugliest place in the Republic, the ugliest place in the United States. The Santa Fe Rail Line decided to embark on a marketing campaign to change that view. If you were traveling from to California, you could opt to visit places like Taos Pueblo in New Mexico and see the old Pueblo ruins. To add to the excitement of the rail line, the rail line would also employ local natives to stage what we would now consider stereotypical performances to entice the mainly European American tourists. When the trains got to Flagstaff, Arizona, they would pause, and you would be given the option to take a tour of the Grand Canyon. The rail line would lead guided tours on donkeys to the canyon floor. The Northern Pacific Railroad will play a similar role in popularizing Glacier National Park. Now, the very best of the rail cars were known as limiteds, and they epitomized luxury travel. If you lived in isolated rural communities, your one glimpse at high-class city life was when the limited passed through. It was the building of the railways that made it really possible for the farmers to settle the Great Plains. The great industrialists or the robber barons, men like Rockefeller, they took advantage of the railways to establish nationwide marketing networks. Other lines were finished. I mean, after that first transcontinental rail line was finished in 1869, other lines jumped on board and began to ferry passengers across the nation at different places. The Southern Pacific took the southerly route, traveling through the states that border Mexico. The Northern Pacific with another route, the Great Northern Pacific with another, and the Santa Fe. That brought the total to five transcontinental railways by the 1890s, and a number of what are called spur lines, smaller lines that linked all of the five great transcontinental railways from north to south. And these lines were the lifeline of isolated communities that brought in goods that could not be produced or manufactured locally. And the goods, namely, were wood and coal. Now, while transporting the grain that grew out west to eastern markets, for the railway companies, it was in their best interest to have the areas along the track settled. Now, this led them to subsidize the building of local communities, and you will find that rail lines like the Northern Pacific Railroad took a special interest in advertising to aspiring farmers in the eastern states and in in European countries. They were particularly successful in convincing peoples to move out to the Dakotas or to Minnesota to settle the plains. Now, with the railway, they convinced these settlers to move out to establish farms on the plains, and they did so with the understanding that the railway will be repaid by the farmers after the farmers found their economic footing, which typically worked out for both parties. Now, the early corporations began to devise marketing schemes using the railways, and really for the first time, it became possible for goods manufactured in one location within the republic to be sent through the whole republic. It was now a prudent business model. It was now prudent for businesses, I should say, to have national advertising campaigns. One of the first to have a national marketing campaign was the National Biscuit Company, better known now as Nabisco, and they embarked on a nationwide campaign to compete with local businesses. By the 1890s, all but the most perishable of goods were able to be sent anywhere within the republic within days. And by the late 1890s, really by the dawn of the 20th century, a new marked improvement, a new improvement in refrigeration occurred. And with that improvement in refrigeration, all goods were able now to be shipped throughout the republic. With the perfecting of refrigerated trains, it was now possible to eat foods that were once seasonal to be eaten year round, which meant that you could eat strawberries or oranges or lettuce in the winter months. This was again a revolution in the diet of Americans. Prior to this, you could only eat them when they were in season. With such produce coming from faraway locations such as Florida or Southern California and being sent to northern locations like Chicago or Pittsburgh. Now, railways transformed the republic between 1830 and 1890. The chief drawback, the chief accomplishment of the railroads was that it bound the two great coasts of the republic together more closely. The Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast were now bound intricately together. And in doing so, they brought all the citizens into a greater degree of interconnectedness. And with that, we'll end our lecture really on the Transcontinental Railways. And as always, hit like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you thought about this lecture. And I'm Ted, and I'll see you guys next time.